Imagine this. You wake up in a dim, unfamiliar room. The air is thick, not with smoke or dust, but with a kind of stillness, the heavy silence that only grief, regret, or some undefined ache can bring. You reach for your memories like a drowning. Man grasps for air, but nothing solid comes, only fragments. Faces you once knew, emotions too vague to name, and a deep sensation that something essential has been lost. Not in the world, in you. There's no noise, no calendar on the wall, no clock ticking, just you and a mirror. You approach it slowly, drawn to the reflection like a moth to flame, and what you see startles you. It's your face, yes, but distorted by time, maybe pain. Behind your eyes there's something wild, something ancient, something watching. Not judging, not angry, but unrelenting. It's been there all along, hasn't it? A voice rises, not from around you, but within. Not a thought, not an impulse, but a knowing. And it asks a single terrifying question. Why have you suffered? Not what caused your suffering. Not who did it to you. Not how to escape it. But why? It's the question we bury beneath our routines, behind our careers, inside our relationships, and beneath our addictions. It's the question we mask with laughter, drown with distraction, and medicate with explanations that never fully satisfy. Because to ask why is to admit that pain might have a purpose, and if that's true, then we were never victims. We were participants, co-authors. But that's too much, isn't it? Because if your suffering means something, then what about the late-night panic attacks that came out of nowhere, the heartbreaks that shattered you, the silent childhood wounds that no one ever validated, the failures that rewrote your sense of self-worth, the traumas you never speak of, because even thinking about them feels like stepping on broken glass? Are they just cruel accidents, biological misfires, or sacred signals? Carl Jung once said, "Man needs difficulties, they are necessary for health, not because life is masochistic, but because somewhere in the darkness of your most unbearable moments there is a strange doorway, one you wouldn't even know existed if everything had gone the way you planned. You were not meant to break down. You were meant to break open. But society never told you that. It told you to be happy, productive, strong, to smile through pain, to move on before you're ready. To chase perfection, chase success, chase meaning, but never to sit with suffering long enough to hear what it's saying. Because suffering speaks a strange language, one not taught in schools or churches. It whispers in dreams, in the body, in synchronicities, in symbols that repeat themselves until you finally look. And when you do, you realize something chilling. The suffering wasn't just there to wound you, it was there to summon you, to awaken a part of you that logic alone could never touch, to strip away the false layers of identity until only the raw, unfiltered truth of who you are remains. A truth so pure, so painful, so liberating, that most people spend their lives avoiding it. And maybe you have too, but not anymore, because that mirror, the one you stood before earlier, isn't just showing you your face, it's showing you your shadow, the part of you you've rejected, ignored, demonized, or exiled. The inner exile who carries the weight of your unlived life. And until you acknowledge it, that suffering will keep knocking, louder and louder, until your whole identity cracks under the pressure. So ask yourself, what if suffering is not the enemy? What if it's a messenger? What if your pain knows something you don't? What if healing isn't about erasing the wound, but listening to it? You may think you've come here for answers, but the truth is, your answers mean nothing without the right question. And the real question has never been, how can I stop suffering? No. The real question is, what is my suffering trying to awaken in me? And until you dare to face that question, fully, honestly, unflinchingly, you will continue living in circles, repeating the same emotional loops, blaming fate, blaming others, blaming yourself, all the while missing the deeper truth beneath the pain. But that truth is waiting, in the shadows, in the cracks, in the chaos, and it has a voice. Are you ready to listen? Let's go deeper. You've been taught to see pain as a malfunction, an interruption in the program of life, something to avoid, suppress, or medicate. But Jung, Nietzsche, and the great explorers of the inner world saw suffering not as a detour, but as the very path itself. And what if the real tragedy is not that we suffer, but that we misunderstand the message hidden within it? Jung believed that every moment of emotional agony is a conversation with the unconscious, a psychic event. When something in your life collapses, a relationship, a belief system, your sense of meaning, it's not random chaos. It's your psyche breaking through the surface, demanding attention, not to punish, but to transform. Still, transformation doesn't sell. It doesn't win elections. It doesn't fit into the clean narratives of modern life, where everything is expected to be optimized, efficient, and under control. In fact, our entire society is designed to numb us from the intensity of our inner world. Capitalism commodifies distraction. Education standardizes identity. Religion moralizes suffering into guilt. Technology fragments our attention until we can no longer hear the quiet voice inside. So what's really happening here? At the root of your pain is not failure, it's disconnection from yourself, from your instincts, from your shadow, a concept Jung described as the totality of all the parts of you that were pushed away, shamed, denied, and forgotten. You were not born fragmented, you were taught to be. And that fragmentation is the origin of your silent suffering. Think of how early it starts. A child cries out in fear or confusion and is told, "Don't be dramatic." They express rage and are punished. They express sorrow and are ignored. Little by little, they learn which emotions are acceptable and which must be hidden. But those exiled parts don't disappear, they sink. They hide in the basement of the unconscious, where they grow teeth. So as you grow older, the pain you feel is often not from what's happening now, but from the accumulation of all the truths you never got to live. You were told who to be. You were told how to feel. You were told what success looks like. And your soul, silently screaming behind the facade, began to rot under the pressure of pretending. Schopenhauer once said, "Suffering is the substance of all life." And in that bleak insight lies a strange freedom. Because if suffering is inevitable, then perhaps it's also purposeful. Not in a cosmic punishment sort of way, but in a revelatory way. Like a fever, it signals that something deep inside is calling for integration. But integration is messy. To reclaim your shadow means confronting every part of you that was deemed unacceptable. Your rage, your jealousy, your desire, your fear. It means questioning the masks you wear, the roles you perform, the goals you chase. It means admitting that some of your suffering has been self-chosen, not consciously, but through repeated avoidance of the truth. Because here's the brutal irony. What you avoid owns you. The more you deny your sadness, the more it leaks into every interaction. The more you repress your anger, the more passive-aggressive you become. The more you bury your desires, the more they control you from the shadows. And this, Jung said, is the true danger of the unconscious. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That's the hidden problem. Not your pain, but your refusal to face it. Not your shadow, but your refusal to see it. Not life's unpredictability, but your need to control it. You see, we live in an age that pathologizes discomfort. We call every emotion a disorder, every crisis a malfunction. But what if your anxiety is a protest against a life that no longer fits? What if your depression is not a chemical imbalance, but a spiritual one? A soul-deep signal that something essential is missing? Viktor Frankl, who survived the horrors of Auschwitz, wrote that when a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure. And that's what many have become, seekers of distraction, running from the pain that would otherwise point them back toward themselves. But if suffering is a guide, then pain is not a prison, it's a portal. It reveals your unlived life. It demands radical honesty. It calls you to examine the story you've told yourself about who you are, and whether that story still serves the truth of your becoming. So let's ask again, with more clarity now. Why do you suffer? Because something inside you is unfinished, unexpressed, unknown. The suffering is not an enemy. It's the signal that something buried wants to emerge, and it will keep whispering, screaming, or tearing through your life until you finally stop, running and turn inward. But here's the catch, and that turn inward is terrifying, because it demands you let go of the false self you've spent a lifetime constructing. It demands you feel what you've tried to forget. It demands you mourn what you've lost, confront what you've denied, and remember who you were before the world told you who to be. Yet it is only through that journey that suffering reveals its true nature, not as punishment, but as initiation. A spiritual rite of passage disguised as personal failure. An alchemical fire that purifies, if you are brave enough to endure it without turning away. This isn't self-help. It's self-confrontation, and it's the only way through the darkness. Because what you are suffering from is the unlived life within you. And now that you've seen its roots, now that you've glimpsed the ancient wound at the center of your identity, the question becomes, what happens if you ignore it? Let's go there next. It doesn't announce itself with a roar. It doesn't break through like lightning. The consequences of avoiding your suffering seep in quietly, subtly, like a fog rolling into a familiar landscape, muting the colors, dulling the edges. You don't notice the shift at first. You go to work, you make small talk, you tell yourself, I'm fine, but slowly, something inside you begins to harden. A numbness takes root, not apathy, but a deeper detachment, from your passions, from your sense of wonder, from the electric vitality of being fully alive. You laugh, but it doesn't reach your eyes. You succeed, but feel nothing. You say, I love you. But a part of you wonders if you still remember what love actually feels like. That's what happens when the voice of suffering goes unheard. You stop evolving. Jung warned us of this, that when pain is repressed, the psyche doesn't heal, it splits, it compensates, it builds defenses, it creates personas, the masks you wear to protect yourself from judgment, from failure, from the truth. But those masks become cages. You start playing a role in your own life, a performance so convincing that even you forget it's not who you really are. And here lies the unseen cost. When you abandon your suffering, you abandon yourself, not the version you show to the world, but the one buried beneath all the pretending, the child who still aches for safety, the lover who yearns to be touched. Without fear, the warrior who has never felt permitted to fight for what truly matters. These parts become ghosts in your body, echoes in your nervous system, and their silence turns into symptoms. You begin to wake up tired even after sleep. Your body aches with no medical cause. You feel irritated for no reason. You forget why you walked into a room. You start canceling plans, not because you're lazy or unfriendly, but because somewhere along the way your inner world became heavier than your outer one, and you're carrying that weight in silence. Science has a name for this: allostatic load, the physiological wear and tear from chronic emotional stress. But Jung had another name: psychic possession, a state in which the unconscious, unintegrated, takes over your life from beneath. Your awareness, your reactions become exaggerated, your relationships become unstable, your dreams become chaotic, and yet you tell yourself, this is normal, this is adulthood, this is life. But it's not. It's slow spiritual decay. Because the longer you ignore the call of your suffering, the louder it must become. What begins as subtle tension morphs into existential dread. A vague dissatisfaction turns into self-sabotage. Missed opportunities pile up. Resentment simmers. You start attracting the same toxic dynamics, the same betrayals, the same empty rewards, and over, as if life is trying to shake you awake by repetition. These aren't accidents, they are patterns. Your psyche speaks in patterns, in symbols, in events that look like coincidence but carry the architecture of myth. This is the deeper magic of suffering. It bends reality around your wound until you have no choice but to look inward. You lose what you thought you couldn't live without. You meet someone who mirrors your deepest wound. You are betrayed exactly where you refuse to trust, not because life is cruel, but because the lesson must be felt to be known. And yet most people never answer the call. They settle for distraction, scrolling, shopping, drinking, working, anything to avoid the confrontation of self. But the price of avoidance is your soul. Jung was clear. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. That's the trap. You might build a beautiful life externally, but feel like a stranger within it. You might achieve everything you once prayed for, but feel like you're watching your life through a pane of glass. You might be surrounded by people, yet feel invisible. Because the one person you most desperately need to meet, you, remains buried beneath years of unresolved pain. And this perhaps is the most insidious consequence. You forget that something is missing. You normalize the emptiness. You rationalize the deadness. You adopt beliefs like, some people just aren't meant to be happy, or this is as good as it gets. You call it realism, but it's not, it's surrender. A slow, quiet death of the self. And then something tragic happens. Your suffering, once sacred, once filled with the potential to awaken you, becomes toxic. Not because suffering itself is evil, but because when ignored, it festers. It turns into bitterness, into projection, into cruelty. What you don't heal, you hand down to your children, to your partner, to the world. The cycle continues. You become what you never wanted to be, another wounded person wounding others. But it doesn't have to be that way. There's a deeper path, a path not taught in schools or sanctified in institutions, a path hidden beneath your symptoms, beneath your habits, beneath your false smiles. A path back to the self, the whole undivided self that Jung called the central archetype of the human psyche. Not the ego, not the shadow, but the one who can hold both without breaking. That self is still alive in you, beneath the noise, beneath the fear, beneath the roles you've played to survive. And it is waiting for you to listen, to feel, to remember. So the question is no longer, what happens if I suffer? The question is, what happens if I keep running from it? If you've come this far, you already know the cost. Now it's time to break the cycle, not by escaping the darkness, but by learning how to walk through it. Let's begin the rebellion. There comes a moment when the ache becomes too loud to ignore, not a breakdown, not a tragedy, but something quieter, a whisper in the soul, subtle but undeniable. I can't keep living like this. That's the moment the rebellion begins. Not the rebellion of fists and flames, but of awareness, of daring to see what you've been avoiding, of refusing to keep pretending. That moment is sacred. Because to rebel against your suffering is not to fight it. It's to listen to it and then disobey the false self it created. You were not born to be a puppet of your pain. You were born to transcend it, not by deleting the past, but by rewriting your relationship to it. Jung understood this intimately. He wrote, "We don't solve our problems, we outgrow them." And growth begins the moment you stop asking how to return to your old self and start asking who you were, before the world told you who to be. So how do you break free? First, stop lying to yourself. This may sound obvious, but most suffering persists because of one simple habit: self-deception. You say you're fine. You say it didn't hurt. You say you've moved on. But your nervous system tells another story. Your body clenches when that name is spoken. Your dreams turn restless. Your joy feels manufactured. The rebellion begins with brutal honesty. What am I pretending not to feel? Sit with that question. Let it burn. Let it collapse the narratives you've used to survive. Let it strip you bare, because healing is not gentle. It's surgical. And the wound must be cleaned, not bandaged. That means feeling the grief, the anger, the confusion. That means allowing the tears you never let fall. That means revisiting the moments you swore you'd never return to. But this time, as the observer, not the victim. You see, the ego wants control, it wants resolution, it wants closure. But the soul wants something different: wholeness. And wholeness requires reclaiming every piece of you, even the ones covered in shame, silence, or sorrow. This is the essence of shadow work. Jung developed the concept not as a metaphor, but as a psychological necessity. Your shadow is not evil. It's everything you've exiled in order to be accepted: your sexual impulses, your rage, your hunger for power, your irrational fears, your despair. All the parts you judged or were judged for and buried alive, but what's buried doesn't die, it waits. And it leaks into your habits, your relationships, your language, your self-worth. The rebellion is this: inviting those parts back home, not to indulge them, not to obey them, but to understand them, to see that the rage was really a cry for boundaries, that the jealousy was a thirst for recognition, that the sadness was mourning something sacred. And in doing so, you integrate the exiled. You become whole, but this takes courage. more courage than any war, because the battlefield is internal. You'll face resistance. Your mind will tell you you're crazy, that it's pointless, that you're wasting time, that your suffering defines you. But that voice is not truth. It's the echo of old conditioning. It's the ghost of every moment you were taught that your feelings were a threat, that your truth was too much, that your essence was unworthy. And here's the radical truth. You don't need permission to be whole, not from your family, not from your past, not from your culture, only from yourself. So the rebellion continues. Reclaim your narrative. Your suffering is not your identity. It is your initiation. You are not the anxious one, the broken one, but the overthinker. Those are symptoms of a life out of alignment. They are not who you are. Stop introducing yourself by your wound. Start recognizing that the wound was the beginning of your becoming. This is where we turn pain into power. You can transmute. That is the great alchemy of consciousness. When you face your fear, it becomes fuel. When you face your shame, it becomes insight. When you face your grief, it becomes depth. Every piece of your suffering, when witnessed with presence, becomes part of your inner architecture, not a crack but a foundation. And from that foundation, something begins to rise. A voice, a clarity, a new center of gravity. You start saying no when you used to say yes. You start moving slower, breathing deeper, listening longer. You start noticing beauty again, not the loud kind, but the sacred stillness. Between moments, you feel a quiet strength that isn't performance but presence. This is what it means to break free. Not to escape suffering, but to use it as a compass. And it doesn't stop there. Because once you learn to see through the eyes of integration, the world changes. You no longer see others as threats or obstacles. You see their wounds. You hear their unspoken pain. You recognize the masks. Because you've worn them too, and compassion floods in. Not pity, not saviorhood, but empathy born of shared struggle. You begin to lead, not as an expert, but as an example. You walk differently, you speak differently, not because you read a book or followed a program, but because you met your pain face to face and didn't run. And this is the deepest rebellion of all, to become unrecognizable to the systems that once controlled you, to live in alignment with your soul in a world that profits from your disconnection. To define success, not by status, but by sincerity. There is a moment, and you'll know it when it comes, where everything slows, the questions stop echoing, the ache goes quiet, and what's left is not certainty, but stillness, not answers, but presence. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or dramatic transformation. It arrives as something older than language, older than thought, a feeling, a knowing, that your suffering was never a punishment. It was a summons, not to the surface world, not to more achievements or possessions or approval, but inward, to the sacred chambers of the self. That hidden, eternal part of you that never flinched, even when you shattered. The part that waited in silence through all the years you thought you were lost. Carl Jung called it the self, not the ego, not the shadow, but the wholeness that includes them both. He wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And that becoming requires fire, not the fire of destruction, but of transmutation. Suffering was the flame, and you were always the gold waiting to be revealed." This is the paradox. The wound was never the end of your story. It was the beginning of your initiation, because the deeper truth is this: your suffering was sacred. Every tear, every silence, every dark night of the soul was a breadcrumb in the forest. You thought you were breaking, but you were being shaped, tempered, made deep enough to carry something vast, something the ego could never contain. Your essence. You see, the soul doesn't grow through comfort. It grows through rupture, through those holy moments when everything you thought was true dissolves and you're forced to face what remains. That's when the real self appears. Not the one conditioned by society, but the one buried beneath the noise, raw, radiant, wild. And this is what Jung tried to tell us. Suffering strips away illusion. It brings us to the threshold of the unconscious, the forgotten, the divine. And if you're brave enough to cross it, something extraordinary happens. You don't just heal, you wake up. You remember. You remember that you are not separate from the very forces that created the stars, that your suffering mirrors the mythic pattern written across all existence: death, descent, rebirth. That what you went through was not meaningless. It was archetypal. You became the hero, the wanderer, the broken one seeking the Grail. And that Grail is wholeness, not perfection, not happiness, not eternal peace, but wholeness. The ability to carry both the dark and the light without being shattered by either. This is the final truth. Your pain was the doorway back to your power. It led you through the ruins of your former self, through the grief of all you had to leave behind, through the silence where no one else could follow. And when you emerged, you were different. Not healed in the way the world defines healing, but redeemed because you found meaning where others found only madness. You became an alchemist of your own life, and now a strange thing happens. You begin to look back and at the heartbreak, the losses, the moments that nearly destroyed you, and something inside you whispers, "Thank you." Not because you enjoyed it, but because you needed it, because without it you would still be asleep. This is the wisdom you carry now. The world may not see it. The people around you may not understand. That's okay. Some awakenings are invisible, but you feel it, that your suffering, once your greatest enemy, is now your greatest teacher. That the thing that almost ended you has become the thing that gave you life. And from that knowing, a new kind of compassion is born. You stop judging others by their reactions, their defenses, their wounds. You see them as travelers too, souls in the middle of their own descent. And instead of offering advice, you offer presence, not solutions, but space. Because you've learned that the deepest healing comes not from fixing, but from witnessing. This is your gift now, not your story, not your survival, but your capacity to hold others in the dark because you've been there and found the light inside it. And that's the final revolution, becoming the light you were always seeking. Not by force, not by pretending, but by embracing every inch of your humanity, the rage, the joy, the longing, the grief, and finding God there, not in the heavens, not in a distant theology, but in the raw, trembling truth of your own existence. So where do you go from here? You live fully, fiercely, authentically. You let your scars be seen. You speak the truth even when your voice trembles. You love without armor. You say yes to the unknown, because you no longer fear breaking. You've already been broken, and what emerged was not ruin, but revelation. You are not here to be perfect. You are here to be whole. And if you forget, if the fog returns, if the weight creeps back in, you now know the way through. Not around, through. Because the path was never outside of you. It was you. Every step, every fall, every resurrection. So breathe, and remember what Jung knew, that the greatest transformations begin in the places we fear to look, and that once you've looked, you can never go back to sleep. If this journey into the depths of your suffering revealed something real inside you, if you felt seen, cracked open, or more awake than before, then stay with us on this path of deep transformation. Walk with those who are ready to turn pain into power, shadow into light, and suffering into sacred awakening. Your next evolution begins here.